In today's video, we're talking about the concepts of narratology and ludology in an attempt to understand the medium of video games more. Video games are an interesting and challenging medium to examine with a critical eye, because what is and isn't a video game doesn't totally make sense. Even the labeling of them as video games puts them in a box that is a relic of the past. The modern perception of what video games are doesn't really agree with the concept of video games. I imagine someone in the past was just like, it's kind of a video, kind of a game, and that's what we ended up with. But this is now a medium of storytelling and an artistic medium, not something as simplistic as kind of like a video, kind of like a game. There are so many implications that come with that label, and it presents a lot of semantics to the critical community around video games, where people are arguing these semantics all the time. Nowadays, games are mostly respected as a storytelling medium, or an artistic medium, just a medium of entertainment in general. But referring to them as games rather than interactive entertainment or some other alternative puts an emphasis on the player, and what the player does and the action they have within this game becomes important. So this conflict between story and game is narratology versus ludology. Now, narratology is the school of thinking of a game as a text, as if it is another form of traditional media such as a movie or a book. We can analyze it as one story, one whole package. You can analyze games the same way as these other mediums because they're just a story. They're all just stories. They're supposed to be analyzed in the same way we analyze all stories. I think a kind of practical way to look at it is if you're reading a book, odds are, unless you're actively studying sentence structure and syntax, you're not looking at a book as a separate story and also a collection of words. You might do your own studying of what good writing is, and you might study stories for that purpose. But a narratologist would look at it as one story. It wouldn't be breaking down paragraph structure as much. From a narratologist perspective, it would be kind of difficult to separate the physical writing from the message that is being conveyed through the story. What you may view as two sides connect into one whole, and I see the narratology perspective as analyzing that one whole. Some other defining traits of narratology, according to this middlebury.edu write-up, include immersion, agency, and transformation. It's not only that a game's story is important, but in a video game, the immersion that you feel within that story, you feel like you're part of it as a player. That does matter to a narratologist. This doesn't totally remove the player. And that's actually one assumption I had coming into the research of this video. I thought that a narratologist would want to simply view a game completely separate from the aspects that make it a game, but that is not true. Now let's take a trip over to ludology land. The preface of lud, or ludo, however people say it, I believe it is Latin. It means game. You might hear a British person refer to the game Clue as Cluedo, because apparently it makes sense to mix those two things. Ludology puts the emphasis on the player. What is the player doing? How is the game making them do it? What are strategies to the game? A hardcore ludologist probably has much more interesting questions to ask, but I think you get the idea of what I mean. The ludology side is much more focused on rules and systems and how the game works, not as much the story. The ludology side is also the basis for the field of game studies, which is becoming more popular in education. The ludological side adds a curveball for me personally because it puts the emphasis on the experience of the player, which at my core, I believe is the most important part of a game. But when you think of the specifics of what that means, and what it means from the critical lens that I'm trying to come at it with, and just trying to be a game critic overall, a game like Rocket League, it's much more similar to the experience you would have in a high school basketball game than it is any story you've ever read. And that kind of separation of experience versus story, I know how to critique a story. I'm not sure I know how to critique an experience. I don't know how to come up with a profound idea based around a high school basketball game. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I'm trying to figure that out myself. And that's what it feels like. I love a game like Rocket League, but what is there to say about it besides it's car shocker? It's fun car shocker, but it is car shocker. But I guess that is just the divide that exists within games. I brought up the comparison earlier of books being a collection of words and a story. I think that's a little simplistic when you bring it to games. Games are a game and a story. And you can view those all at once, but you at least need the ludologist perspective to analyze what is actually happening in a game. There's no way to analyze the function of a video game without analyzing how the game actually works. Another misunderstanding I had in my research for this is that I really did think that these two sides were at odds. It was the narratologists versus the ludologists. But really, they are just kind of covering both sides. So with that, I wanted to believe that this was just a death match and you had to choose your side, and it's like politics and you gotta hit the other side as much as you can and have blind belief in the side that you have chosen. But it's really not like that. This is what I'm talking about with the difficulty that surrounds game analysis just by the semantics of it all. I venture to believe that most people would believe in a ludonarrative view, a combination of the two. There has to be a coherent and engaging game side, as well as a coherent and engaging narrative side. I think that's what most people want out of their games, and some games can succeed being heavily weighted in game or heavily weighted in story. But overall, if you're critiquing for what is a complete experience, you're probably pretty balanced. And ludonarrative might sound like a familiar word to you because you've probably heard ludonarrative dissonance as a popular buzzword in the critical world. Critics loved to throw this term around for years, and I do think that a lot of people have mistaken the trendiness of the term for a lack of functionality. I do believe that ludonarrative harmony is a thing that you want in a game in order for it to transcend the whole medium. I mean, make it mean more than just being your simple video game. And this idea of ludonarrative harmony or dissonance, it exists because, as I said before, there are two sides to this. Like, I love the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid 5, but the story leaves a lot to be desired, and I have to make that distinction when I talk about that game. But as I said, ludonarrative dissonance, it was very trendy for a while. You probably know all of this, but I wouldn't let that trendiness discourage you from thinking about that on your own when you think about games, because I do think it's a pertinent critique to make. Narratology and ludology, they're two crucial sides to video games. We need to understand both sides, and I wanted to come in here and fight. I wanted to say ludology all the way, but I realize these sides only succeed if they work together, and really the only medium that allows them to work together are video games. So let's respect them for that. There's no battles here or sides to pick, merely two concepts that are best if they work together. But sometimes I would say a debate is probably in order.